Hey, let's start the show.
For Friday, September 23rd, 2022. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast this week, ending on a Friday. It feels like it's been so long. Kishore, welcome, Kishore. Good to see you. Last week we recorded early. This week a little bit late. And in the time between, I have been to Galaxy's Edge and back again.
Does it still hold up for you? Because this is what, your third trip to the Outer Rim?
To Batu. I've been Batu by way of Anaheim, Jotunheim, in Southern California, Orange County, Disneyland. And then I've also, the last time, before this past weekend, it was actually February 2020 was when I did that Walt Disney World trip, and not Disneyland, Walt Disney World Hollywood Studios in Florida. That's where Galaxy's Edge is there. It's the exact same, land built out mostly geographically. It had Rise of Resistance back then. That's when I got to ride it. And this time I did get to do Rise of Resistance again, as well as the Smuggler's Run. But it's a different world. And I think I love Disneyland. I will say, I'm going to caveat this. I love the Disney experience. I love theme parks. But the luster of Galaxy's Edge is gone a little bit, just a little bit. And part of that is because the crowd, maybe, like, I'm not saying the crowds were necessarily a good thing. When it's really packed, it can be very frustrating. But it felt like there was less of an energy, a buzz, of a newness to it. The people are there. A lot of them already been there. It wasn't super crowded. Like I'll give you an example. Smuggler's Run, the ride where you go in the Millennium Falcon. The first time I went back in 2019, it was just open. The lines were incredibly long, and they do this whole incredible carousel thing where they stage you not only in the line outside as you weave in and out around the docking bay, but you also, once you get inside and get the briefing from the animatronic, you go inside the Millennium Falcon and you're in that main area with the generic table, with the bunk beds, with even buttons on the walls that you can press, and you're kind of in that holding area with a bunch of other people while you wait for your group to get called. And there is kind of energy in that room and excitement as well. This time, middle of the day, and maybe it's because they streamline, and maybe it's because it's post-COVID, in the post-COVID era, in the era of COVID, they did not have that big gathering of people inside the holding area. And it was, once you got into the line, you basically went straight through and into the cockpit and did the ride. And it took a little bit of that build up and a little bit of that excitement away, I think. It was just a little bit of a different experience.
The luster was bound to come off. I mean, it's that way for pretty much every ride. I'm just a little surprised that it doesn't still have that vibe of being a hive of scum and villainy. I feel like the cantina is the thing that's not going to age poorly, just because food, drinks, actors around, like, that's where you're going to get like continual value. The rides are the rides.
Yeah, and I still have yet to do the cantina, make a reservation for that. And it's the lines were incredibly long for that. And also, this was also the first time going with the family with both kids. So our youngest child, our daughter's first time at Disneyland, and our oldest, almost 4 years old, just a couple months away from being 4, his first time in a couple of years, and at an age where we think he's going to retain some memories about it, where he could at least navigate and comprehend and about what was going on, and he was able to ride the ride. So that's the other thing. Our kid is really tall for his age, and we did California Adventure and Disneyland, and he was able to do Splash Mountain at not 4 years old. He did the Rapids ride in California Adventure, the one where you're in the donut spinning around. He did Smuggler's Run. He was an engineer with me in the back, pressing the buttons, deploying the harpoon to get the cargo in, the tractor beam. And then he also did Rise of the Resistance and loved it.
That's great.
Yeah, I
Well,
think.
you got him hooked. Now he's going to become a Disney adult. His fate is sealed.
I mean, I think we counted him. I think he did 12 rides in one day. We were there just for the Friday, and between the two parks, he did 12 rides. Enjoyed the spit out of all the Halloween theming, the giant pumpkins and the entranceway. And we stayed through Fantasmic, which is one of my favorite parts of the Disney experience. I love that show. Through Fantasmic, through the fireworks, and we left at like 10:30, 10:45, and he was exhausted. Like we had these fast track equivalent tickets to get to like Indiana Jones or to do another ride, and I was like, you want to go on Indiana Jones, you want to try it? And he's like, no more rides. And then I had to pick him up and carry him the 15-20 minute walk back to the hotel room because he was just a bag of exhaustion by the end of the day. But it was a good trip overall. Highly recommended.
Did that trip make you pumped for Andor? Because I have to say, like, I actually think this series hasn't had the same hype as a lot of the prior the series, like Mandalorian season 2, Book of Boba Fett, even Obi-Wan. There's so much familiarity and investment in those characters that I think the hype machine got a little out of control. I myself was pacing myself because I was playing catch up on Lord of the Rings, and I'm ready to get off that ride.
No, stay on the ride. The ride's so good.
It looks great, but I am tiring of the one note characters. Like I initially was super on board with Warrior Galadriel, but she is just so impulsive and one dimensional so far. Like I need to see some growth from some people.
Watch it for the
actually,
orcs.
I think the
least.
Harfoots are actually kind of great, but
yes.
But man, the elves need work. Anyways, the Andor just sort of sprung up on me. Like I know they dropped 3 episodes. I only watched the first one. Did you go through all 3?
I did on Tuesday at midnight. So it debuted Wednesday, and I think you're right in terms of how much build up there's been. I mean, it wasn't of the Star Wars shows, live action shows so far. Mandalorian was a massive hit immediately because you had the surprise of Grogu, of Baby Yoda, pop culture phenomenon, and a new iconic character that's that's basically front and center, leading the way for all of Star Wars merchandising, and then Obi-Wan, because that's decades in the making, a highly anticipated return, could not be hyped more. Boba Fett in the same way in terms of a familiar character. Andor, like this is exactly a show where if we didn't know how good it was, people probably could have lived without it. Like it didn't need to be made. It's a prequel show. We know the fates of this character specifically, and for it to have been greenlit, there must have been an interesting story to tell. And if you listen to and read the interviews by Tony Gilroy, who ran the show and wrote the episodes, he comes at it from this interesting perspective of no fan service. He just cares about telling a good story, and it feels that way. And the fact that it's 12 episodes, not 6 episodes, and 12 is loose. Like the episodes are 40 minutes long, plus including credits, so they're really like 35 to 40 minutes long so far at the longest. So the first 3 feels like a mini movie. It feels like a film. I think the editor of Del Rey Books posted on Twitter saying like this feels actually like a Star Wars novel more so than any other show so far in the Star Wars universe. Like the slow pacing, the flashbacks, the real slow burn of it all, the tension of it all. They're not in a rush.
That's what I was going to say, though. Like, as opposed to Mandalorian, which was a throwback to the spaghetti Western, or just at least the Western aesthetic that underpinned the original Star Wars movies. This feels much more like a thriller so far. It is slowly paced, but you can see like there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of people with let's just say their moral compass is not pointing north, is like the short way of putting it. Um like we're not going to spoil anything, but we do have to talk about one character. What is your take
B2? Are you
on
talking about?
B2?
Oh, you mean B2E, or as I like to call him, B4E? It's Baybot.
He's
He's
the
the
most
best.
emo robot ever. It's
Oh, he's the
B2
best.
emo.
B2, yeah, B2 emo or B4 emo. Yeah, he's great. He's great. Very much reminiscent of, I'm going to forget the name of the robot from Black Hole, Disney's Black Hole,
Oh my goodness.
the red
Was
robot. Yes,
that's like that's it, like such an old series, or old movie.
Vincent and Bob. That's it. It reminds me of Bob from Black Hole a little bit. I want to say there's
That
some
movie came out in the
inspiration.
70s,
Oh
right?
yeah,
That
oh
was
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think we did an off-world episode about Black Hole, uh, but it has that. It has the very much an R2.
It's a
In terms of
chonky boy though.
it is, but and the, there's no K2 so far, but you can tell the relationship that Andor has with B2 kind of shows like he's more comfortable with, with no ties to, with no human ties, right? Because he's ready to lose it all, and he does lose it all at the end of Rogue One, right? Like this is the beginning of that. The thing I like about the show so far, we won't spoil if you haven't seen it so yet, but it is, the time period is explicitly this 5 years before episode 4. So this is, Rogue One was right before episode 4. This is 5 years before that, and it's the beginning of the rebellion. So I think it's must be squeezed between Solo, where you see some of the sparks of the
Mhm.
rebellion at the end of that, and but here it's less about like the ragtag rebellion, the rebels who are hiding. It's about people who are in the system, right? Like, and how a system, how the empire works. I think that's what's interesting about the show is I explore how could it's, how could in something so overtly evil that you saw in episode 4, right? Or like the Emperor, how could they maintain a grip on the galaxy? And in that sense, has these great parallels to the real world.
Yeah, and this is a story of the ramifications of that oppression. And that's like a tried and true Star Wars type story. I think it's awesome that we are seeing this in the non-Jedi kind of framing. I think that's been a crutch for these Star Wars shows. So seeing non-powered, non sort of um, characters that have a huge lineage is actually a breath of fresh air. I know Andor was in Rogue One, but like he's just simply not a character that has a ton of backstory. Um, so I'm in on this, but I still think we have seen too many of these shows not stick the landing. So I'm going to be cautious in my approach to it.
12
Especially
episodes.
Obi-Wan left me with a really bad
Yeah.
taste at the
Yeah.
end too.
Yeah. And I guess you could see the parallels there in both the Obi-Wan and Andor are shows where the ultimate fates of these characters are known.
Mhm.
And they're filling the blanks, and with Obi-Wan kind of like really expanding, the Star Wars mythos of the Skywalker saga, with his relationship with Leia. Here, it feels more outer rim. It feels like, galaxy building in a way that we had hoped these shows would be. That they're not going to have cameos, and if the show can pull off not having, a Sith or Jedi, that's going to be incredible. And I think Tony Gilroy's attitude towards Star Wars and towards writing will give us that. Yeah, there's some great directing, great writing so far, and a good balance of use of backlot or soundstage volume style work, location shoots, and it looks and feels expensive.
Mhm.
Um, so we'll probably get back to Andor in a couple weeks. It goes through November at 12 weeks, I believe. And as on the Marvel side, as we have She-Hulk. Have you been following She-Hulk? Have you been watching?
Yeah, I haven't watched the episode that dropped today, but as we record this, but I've been staying up to date. I mean, Madison is still my favorite character.
Yeah.
And the show is a sitcom, and so there isn't. I don't think it's going to be memorable, but I think it's actually been quite good. It won't be memorable because it lacks a true antagonist. Um, and it still has a little bit of time to develop that, but like it completely embraced the sitcom aesthetic, and it's so incredibly true to the source material.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to be anything but like a golf clap for what it is, because I think it might be the show that is the truest to the source material of any of the Disney Plus shows they've put out on the Marvel side.
Well, that's just true to the source material, but also to the format of a
Yeah.
graphic novel, of a monthly series or limited edition series. And in that sense, because we have so much from Marvel, from the MCU, it kind of feels like the heyday of comic books, where you don't have to read everything. You can read your imprints that you like. You can wait for the big crossover events to collect them all, but you kind of watch the shows and watch the movies you like as you would have from your monthly pull list, and you can be okay with that. They can stand aside, stand alone, and cameos, great, but they're not all essential at this point, which is fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to keep up with all of this because I've been spending most of my free time in MS Paint drawing a map of GTA 6, along with the rest of the internet. It has been a long time since the internet has united together around a single story and leak and started to pieces. This almost felt like people trying to solve the mystery of Lost, like that kind of like throwback with the leaks. Like, first of all, uh, did you see the leaks before they've essentially all gotten pulled from
No.
major internet sites?
Well, I saw the reporting of the leaks, and I read the Verge story. I did not watch any of the videos, but read the descriptions of. I know if you don't want to be spoiled and you haven't seen it, I know the location, right? That much like previous the GTAs, we were revisiting parts of the GTA world that had been seen in the past before. But it's so. I mean, it's so unfortunate. I feel for the developers. I love the development community getting together to really band together and show like people and the trolls that games take a long time to develop, and people really don't have a sense of how games are supposed to look early on in development, and how a look of a game can dramatically change up until the last minute, and that this is how this is a very, very early game in development that got leaked, and it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, so yes and no. So sure, I feel for the developers who've been working on this for years and seeing the work kind of come out without context is not great. The snarky comments, like, putting that aside, this is an awesome stunt in a lot of ways. I know they're like the FBI is on the trail of like the hacker that actually did this, all that kind of stuff, blah blah blah. I think the hype machine is pretty high for this thing, and I think in the end, Take Two is going to reap some benefits from this. It wasn't great seeing their stock like tank like 5-6% on the news of this leak, but overall, like, I think people are pretty excited about what they've seen, understanding that it's still years away, based on where they are in the development cycle. So I think this is going to end up being a net positive. I was just enjoying the ride because seeing like the community coming together to try to piece together the map, it was like the button on Reddit again, like
Right.
the internet united for a moment in time, for a really stupid reason, but that's why the internet was invented.
I mean, it sounds like the source code was not leaked, even though that was
No.
what was threatened, and that would have been tragic, and
That's different level stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So these are debug videos and temporary UI and some story points in terms of who the protagonists might be. It makes me think of other leaks in gaming history. In Half-Life
Half-Life
leaked,
source
right?
code, right?
Half-Life.
Yeah.
Doom was leaked. Early Doom 3. Sorry, Doom 3 was leaked as a part of like a AMD Radeon graphics package, and yeah, it did build a lot of anticipation back in the day. But the internet was very different as well, and the stakes were a little different in terms of how much these games cost to make and how long they're in development and what the expectation is for when they launch. So I think it does suck, but I think, like I said, a lot of the big developers were rallying to support the Rockstar team, and we put our faith and trust in the team there to push through it and get the game out whenever it's ready to be formally announced. Something that was formally announced in the video game world, the big and true announcement came by way of Nvidia for their 40 series graphics cards. This is the Ada Lovelace generation. Years
Chip
after
shortage. What chip shortage?
not just what chip shortage, no more price decreases. Moore's law is dead. The age of decreasing prices begone. Everything's gonna cost more and more, and these cards are expensive. The RTX 4090 is their flagship on the consumer side on the high end, and this is going to be a $1,600 graphics card launching later next month, middle of October. Yeah.
I mean, like, we have to wait till the reviews come out and the benchmarks come out, but Nvidia is claiming like speeds like two to four times like the 3090. I don't know what that means, right?
Yeah, that means
But
nothing. Like,
right?
this is the art of looking at charts where the baselines shift and you read the fine print. Anyone who's covered graphics cards knows it's always about the fine print. What are the circumstances? And I believe in this case they're talking about really a combination of the new architecture as well as taking advantage of DLSS 3. And DLSS is the thing that is going to increase graphics frame rates, but while maintaining quote unquote the same image quality.
There are massive memory bumps too in like size. So like is the 4090 start at like 128 gigs on there?
No.
Or no,
24
24 gigs of memory on there. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a big bump from where we were. So I understand that.
I think the high end sweet spot is going to be probably. I mean, it's for early adopters. The 4080, that's under $1,000. You're still talking about $1,000 for a graphics card, right after tax, everything. But that's 12 gigabyte model, and then I think, like with all the generations, you're going to wait for the 70, right? The 4070, whenever that's announced, probably next year. That's going to be like find your $600, again, very expensive still, sweet spot for a high-end graphics card.
They haven't talked about the power usage of the 4070, did they? I can't remember if they did.
No, the 4070 was announced. 4080, they said you'll need a 700 watt, and I think on the high end, 850 watt.
That is insane. Like all of these is like pretty big retrofits because don't you need like new PCIe slots that can manage the power too?
I'm not sure about that.
You need the Gen 5 connector. That's right.
Yeah, the Gen 5 16-pin connector. And these are the 850 watts is the recommendation, inclusive of a modern motherboard and a modern CPU. So it's not they're not talking about the TDP being 850 watts for the single card itself. We're still talking about, couple hundred, 300-400 watts, if that. I couldn't find the exact specifications.
We should get to the ray tracing though, which is what I think this whole presentation was about.
Yes, and like in the past where there have been some ray tracing demos, NVIDIA showed footage of their internal demo. So they had this Racer RTX cinematic rendered real time in engine, which looked Very impressive, very cinematic. These are like tiny RC cars blistering, jumping through a neighborhood. Look gorgeous. And then they also announced RTX for Portal. A developer has been hired to port Portal over to now have ray trace graphics. Which, when you think about it, that's a tough game to do with ray tracing, because once you open a portal and light goes through the portal, it's complicating the scene by orders of magnitude potentially.
I know it's been a long time since I've legitimately played Portal, but I would just think like there's so many surfaces in that game that were matte from what I remember, like the walls,
Yeah.
like everything else. And if you're really going to unleash like ray tracing in that game, there's got to be like shiny, there's got to be like all sorts of like different textures that are going to start to show up in how light bounces off of surfaces. And I imagine it actually might make like certain puzzles harder to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I remember in Portal there are a lot of bouncing, glowing balls. Of course, the
Mm-hmm.
portals that you shoot also glow. So yeah, I mean, there's like swamp water and stuff like that. So you're gonna get like nice reflections on that. Um, I'm excited to try it again, and it's a game where I can just take my time and just kind of enjoy the environments, and I'll be pretty to look at, as well as kind of work, see if I can get out of dad brain and solve puzzles that I solved way back in what 2008 was when Portal came out.
That is not a selling point for a 40 series card for me, though. I will be honest. As I still have like a 3080 going, I don't see a need for an upgrade just for that. But I will say the the enterprise level chip that they started talking about, that's where I was like, holy cow, this is the Hopper AI chip is what I'm referring to. And this is really for like high end use for like biotech companies to use for drug discovery, or like looking at like language processing, like that this is optimized to that. So like two things that were huge about this announcement, like, so it's the H100 chip, which is built on the Hopper architecture. Is one, lower power usage versus what's been done before. And they have like different performance metrics that they said, but it's the wide availability of this for these enterprise applications that is going to be really interesting to advance like some of the AI projects that I know are out there that are working on some of these issues. You basically have like cut in half the cost that it takes to get up and running on some of these things. And because they're distributing it through like a bunch of vendors, the availability should knock on wood, just be there, so that like now, like you or I, if we had like an extra 20-30 grand sitting around, could go start working on some of these problems.
Well, I think it also makes it affordable, and it keeps up the scaling of like AI art and image synthesis, all those services that are going to start ramping up, and all the training of those models. That potentially becomes more affordable for companies to find interesting ways, hopefully non-nefarious ways to use those systems.
Look, I'm excited for like the like protein folding and image analysis, all like the sciencey stuff that is enabled by an architecture like that.
Yeah. Speaking of products that were announced, I came back from the Disney trip, and thankfully we had our housemate here to receive the package, so no one intercepted my phone. Got the phone safe and sound, even though.
Remind me of what you ended up getting. Did you get the Pro?
I did get the Pro. Got the 14 Pro, and maybe I should have waited, because as is customary with these iPhone launches, iFixit did their teardowns of both the 14 and the 14 Pro, and they found a very interesting surprise in not the Pro and the Pro Max line, but the 14 line. What was considered the boring launch this time around because it was basically last year's phone, or at least last year's performance in the iPhone 14 lineup. So what they found though when they took apart the iPhone 14 was a new internal design where for the past 5 years, the iPhones were such that if you wanted to get a look at where the battery was, where the main board and all the radios and everything, you had to open it from the front. You popped open the front, which is the big screen element, and that's where and that's where you see everything, which meant replacing, for example, the back glass on the phones was a very expensive procedure, hundreds of dollars if you crack the back of your phone. And what they found when they opened up the front of the phone this time around of the iPhone 14 was there was no visible internal guts. Behind that screen was actually this mid brace, this mid structure, a plate that divided the front of the phone from the rear of the phone. And the idea is that you could actually open the back glass, and that's where you'd see it was a mirrored effect. On the other side was where behind the shield was where the battery and the motherboard and the memory and everything was, which makes the phone, from iFixit's perspective, much more repairable. And they showed you how to disconnect everything and where everything went in its place. Also saw that, with the eSIM, interestingly enough, because they have to offer SIM cards in Europe, where in the US, there would have been a SIM card slot. It's just an empty space. Perfect size to put a a micro SD card if we're going to do that, which they're never going to do. But an interesting place.
Least Steve Jobs thing ever with the phone is just having like an empty slot where the SIM card would go. I think we should be clear though. iFixit still has a lot of criticism about iPhone repairs, both in how they're essentially like incentivizing independent repair and DIY repair. They still, even though they've started to release manuals and you can buy bundles, it's still a really expensive thing, and it's still definitely shunting you towards going to the Genius Bar or whatever to do your repair. I was looking at the teardown, and this is one of those things I always wait for before I even considering buying Apple products. I'm not like terribly blown away. I wasn't blown away during the presentation of how much of an upgrade this was over the 13, which is what I have right now. And I'm left like wanting. The thing in the teardown that I was looking for was if they could pick off where they put the satellite communication for the emergency SOS.
Yeah, they could not.
And iFixit, they don't know where it is.
No.
And so there's going to be some internet sleuthing. Like it could just be part of the 5G antennas that's in there, or they just haven't sort of found it in some way. I think there's like a little interesting mystery there.
Yeah. I'll tell you the features on the Pro of the 14 Pro. Always on screen. I turned that off after 2 days. I did not like the always on screen.
Not good for your digital well-being at all, huh?
No, my brain is so trained for if I glance at the phone and I see not a black screen, I think I have a text message, an email, or a notification. And my brain could not untrain itself in 2 days to think that. And so I just needed the screen to be black. And now people have uncovered a way in the settings to basically disable the wallpaper of the lock screen, period, or the equivalent of having a black wallpaper. So you just get the time as the always on as you would have like on a Samsung OLED phone, or Android phones have had that for a long time. Just the widgets and the time. So I might try that. But I also like having a lock screen wallpaper. So maybe it's force of habit, but the way they've implemented the always on screen, and also in the battery life test that other people have done, have shown that it is like a not insignificant battery drain over the course of a day. We're talking about 5 to 10% battery, like 5% battery, depending on how often you use it. But if you just have the phone on versus having the phone off, having the screen off, it will drain your battery over time. So I toggled that off.
Yeah, I looking at some of the reviews, I was like hard no for me. That like the always on is not a good look. I always thought when I first saw that in some of the Samsung phones, I was like I don't like this feature here either. I have enjoyed two features in iOS. I do like the widgetized lock screen, very Androidy thing.
Yeah.
And as a Android fanboy forever, it feels like I'm returning home, having ability to put some context aware stuff there. I'm not seeing like rave reviews about Dynamic Island from people. So I think there's some time yet to be seen if that's really going to prove as useful as they say. But it's so much about like what they're doing is still like pushing you into the app. It's not. I don't think it's like as well developed as you think. But the feature I like in iOS that I love is the long press on photos to select items from the photo that you can then like, it's basically,
it's weird. It's this clipping feature. They didn't make a big deal. Like it's like collage work on your photos, and they've done this incredible animation around it. It doesn't even require depth data. You can import. It works on screenshots, but if it identifies a subject, right, a person, you hold and press that subject, and it kind of clips it out, and you can drag it and send it, and put it in the email, and you have a perfectly clipped out silhouette.
Perfectly, but pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah.
So I've been using it to like text images of our son to my wife, like when he's playing baseball, like crop out everything else. I don't know how useful it is, but I like it was a surprising feature that, and maybe that's what it'll bear out is no one. It's like, oh, this is cool, and then no one will actually use it.
I think it feels a little bit like that. Like there was engineering time, there was design work, right? The animation work, right? There were CPU cycles, GPU cycles to do that animation, and maybe it's just using the existing the way they do the depth stuff, the portrait mode on a flat photo without having a depth camera on the front or on the back of the previous single camera phones. But yeah, it's like it's surprising but not necessarily delighting. Like I too sent a few crop photos of our son, and I'm like, oh, what, this just looks like a crop photo. Why not send the whole photo? Like, yeah. People also, speaking of surprises, have found that there could be a bug in the optical image stabilization gyro of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So in certain apps, notably like TikTok, people have not been able to film steady video with the larger camera, and Apple has acknowledged that it is a bug, and they're going to issue a fix soon. But if you like agitate the camera, the gyro, and if you like try it, and it could permanently damage the lens.
That's what I'm very curious about is how quick of a fix will they get out there, and are they going to actually like recall or at least help fix people who actually do damage the gyroscope? And I don't know how easy it is to tell if you've actually permanently damaged it. I mean, if you can really damage it, and then it's going to be super noticeable.
Yeah.
But it's only under these vibrating circumstances that you're probably going to notice the damage too.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Another product interesting that was announced comes by way of Logitech, and it's their G Cloud gaming handheld. So this is kind of the product that we maybe expected maybe Microsoft to push out, or a Steam Deck Lite is what I saw this as. But essentially, it looks like a Nintendo Switch. It's a widescreen 1080p IPS LCD with your standard thumbstick and D-pad and ABXY buttons. Shoulder buttons, looks lightweight, ergonomic. This thing runs Android. It's like it's like a nice looking Android handheld, but it's designed for running streaming games from cloud services. So it was developed in partnership with Nvidia and Microsoft and Tencent. And so it's access to Xbox Cloud Gaming and also Nvidia GeForce Now, as well as Google Play Store, and you can use Steam Link as well.
I think that's the big thing, is that you can use Steam Link. So like you basically have options to all of the cloud-based services that you would want.
Yeah. So, as someone who loves their Steam Deck, and one of my favorite ways to use a Steam Deck when I'm at home is to stream off of my desktop PC, because then it doesn't kill the battery life of the Steam Deck. I get some really great visuals that get downsampled and streamed over, rendered at least 1080 on my desktop side, and then plays on the 800p screen of the Steam Deck. Works great, but the thing I've always wanted is a lighter Steam Deck for that purpose, as well as a high resolution screen and 1080p screen. And so this has that. It's lighter than the Steam Deck significantly. They say it has 12 hours of streaming battery life, and it has a 1080p screen. All sounds good, except for the pricing. This thing is
Do you think it's too expensive?
Oh, yeah. It's launching at MSRP of $350 and a pre-order special price of $300.
I actually thought 300 is where I'd expect a device like this to come in, because it's not like Logitech is subsidizing this to
they have to make
hardware.
Yeah.
I'm actually not super surprised at that price point. I think it's going to be hard for them to garner a huge market share, because like, who are you trying to get? You're trying to get not the hardcore people that are going to buy the Steam Deck. You're trying to get like the people that are looking for a Switch Pro that like never got it, and like are already invested in the Xbox or PC
Nvidia
kind of in the Nvidia like gaming ecosystem. So like, that's a small market. How much do you think it's a problem that you have to have Wi-Fi for this to work?
Oh, not having like 5G? I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a huge
issue either, but it affects it does affect like some of the portability, but I don't think it's a deal killer either.
I don't think 5G is widespread and good enough for this to make sense to be played, traveling on a bus over 5G streaming. That experience I don't think is great. I think this makes sense in the home or at places with decent Wi-Fi, much like the Stadia was on your phone, right? And I like that this is a dedicated device. I know there are a lot of accessories. People are like, oh, you can just buy a controller that you can mount your phone to. And I have one of those Razer Kishis, and I think it's a fine device. It's $100. I think that this is worth more than twice that. I think the proper price for this is, in my mind, $250, discounted $200 would be a real easy buy. For if the ergonomics are good. If there are a lot of also like Chinese handhelds that do the same thing, that run Android, have decent Qualcomm processors. It's not expensive for an OEM to put a device like this together and sell it for like $200. So it's all about like Logitech, known for peripherals, known for buttons and gamepads. Like, is this a good quality device to play with as your primary couch gaming device?
And you got to get hands-on with it before you can say that, because it matters how the weight is distributed. And that battery life number matters a whole lot, because is it 12 really, or is it 8, or is it 6?
Right. And is that full brightness? And I guess it doesn't matter what render resolution, because it's all going over the cloud anyway. Is it rendering native? And weight wise, it's at 1 pound. So it's like a little bit between
a little bit more
Switch
than Switch
and Steam Deck, closer to Switch than Steam Deck.
But I'm one of those people that have always felt that Switch feels underweight for what how I want it to feel in my hand. Like, there's definitely like those long 2-hour plus Breath of the Wild sessions. Yeah, it was great. at being at that level, but I don't mind a little more heft. Steam Deck is too heavy for me for like long sessions. But like,
Well,
so I wonder if they did find a sweet spot.
I think you're talking about two different things, though, because I think Switch, I don't mind it being, I love it being light. I just don't like the feel of the Joy Cons over long
Yeah.
periods of time. It's the size of the buttons and the grip of the buttons. You can get access, you can find ways to add like
Yeah.
more ergonomically sound ways to hold the Switch. But on the Steam Deck side, I think holding it feels so good. The ergonomics of the Steam Deck on just the way you grip the sides, amazing. It's just too heavy to play lying down, holding up.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like this could excel. If it's light enough so I can, at 1 pound, to feel good, tucking my arms in, lying on the couch, reclining, and playing a game, then I think there could be a place for this. Certainly to complement a nice gaming PC at home, or if you don't want to invest in a gaming PC and you want to pay for your Xbox Cloud Gaming or Nvidia, the GeForce Now stuff, then then you have access to a large library at this point of games. I would love to review one. I will see what we can do about that and entering the holiday season. Okay, before we wrap up tech news, let's do our regular check-in about the world of AI art. This is the trend. I think this is going to stick. We've talked about crypto, we've talked about NFTs, and yes, those things are still around. NFTs maybe less so. AI image synthesis, I think we're at just the beginning of something, and every week there's something new. First of all, OpenAI, interesting. They're the ones who did DALL-E, and one of the big differences between DALL-E and Stable Diffusion was Stable Diffusion would allow you not only for you to render locally, but also you could generate. There was no censorship over faces, and DALL-E had previously not allowed faces. Now they're allowing users to upload people's faces, assuming they have the rights to it. And they're still banning the public figures.
Well, let's be clear. The terms of service indicate
Yes.
that you can't use that kind of stuff, but it's not clear that they're doing anything, upfront to prevent that. So all of this is like there's certain gatekeeping still happening, but it's still it's still a pretty soft gate, is I guess the way I would put it. Editing faces, here we go. It's happening.
It's powerful stuff. It's scary stuff. I was talking to some people working in AI, and like the kind of like ideas of things that they think this stuff could be used for goes well beyond the stuff that you and I might be talking about on a podcast, like the ambition of where they can take AI generated imagery, video, like 3D models, like that is we're just at the cusp of this. This is very, very early days, and already very powerful and very impactful and very scary.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of a tangent, but I was listening to a National Academies of Science panel today that had Denbis on it, one of the co-founders of DeepMind. And he was kind of reflecting on like some of the big challenges that they're trying to like train their model to work on. And he spoke pretty openly about how they at DeepMind, they have opened an ethics center that involves like social science and philosophers and all sorts of people that think about like the human aspect, like the use, to be part of their next iteration of some of this work. And I don't think that absolves like responsibility to be like, hey, we're thinking about it, but it shows that the units that are really well funded are being guarded about their approach to scaling this. And like, DeepMind's big thing right now is AlphaFold. This is like protein folding. It's like, this is not a thing that poses a threat to you and I, because it's all about like high-end big data science. But this is, I think it shows like that he spent time on a day that he like won the breakthrough prize in life sciences. He spent time talking about ethics in the context of AI was pretty fascinating. Now, I'm going to one up you though. So editing faces,
Yep.
wild landscape. So this week, a artist, comic creator, I don't even know what word to use for this. So a creator has basically been making a web comic. It's called Zarya of the Dawn. Use Midjourney, which is an AI system, to create the main character, who kind of looks like Zendaya if you kind of like squint a little bit, but has made a web comic and has now copyrighted it as you would any web comic. And this is one of those I'm like, this is cool. He didn't draw it. He used an AI tool to assist rendering the main character, but totally built an entire webcomic series based off of it. And on the surface, I was like, yeah, he should be able to copyright that. But it's so thorny, right? Like in terms of the legality of this, and because what does likeness mean in the context of something like this, where the person didn't draw it? I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
I mean, there's still
want a
creative
legal
input.
scholar to come on and talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, but not only legally, but it's philosophically too, right? The act of creation. It's, again, this is the beginning, and we're gonna need these to test the waters.
And to be clear, the creator that made this said it was AI assisted. He still did stuff around it, so it's different than that. But we still have like major like image houses like Getty still banning AI like artwork on it. But I sort of think this is not a bad thing to happen. Like it changes the entire nature of who is able to tell stories in these formats. I think this could be like a boon for the graphic novel in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting over time to see how varied the looks of these, and there could be trends, and it's gonna be very iterative. But they're all, I mean, at some point they're probably going to start being derivatives of existing formats and familiar formats. But there's no reason it has to stay that way.
I don't know what's happened to me. I'm sour on pop culture this week, and like super high on AI. Like something is flipped inside of me.
You have one more story in open in AI imagery. Getty says no AI generated art. Nope. That's not going to touch it with the stick.
They've had that de facto ban up. I think what is going to be interesting is how are they going to prevent it, as opposed to that being their policy.
Yeah.
Because at some point you have to have systems that are able to detect it, and somebody's going to try to sneak it by and then sell it, and then it becomes a thing.
Yep. And it'll get harder and harder to tell. Yeah, and there's more and more convincing. And there will be a tipping point at some point where there will be more AI-generated art than human-generated art in the not only the current time frame, but in all of history. At some point. I mean, it may not be in our lifetimes, but that is but it probably is going to be a hockey stick moment. If every person who can think of an image, who can enter a prompt, who can interact with the software, can generate art and become an artist in the new sense of the word, then that's an incredibly powerful shift in the way we think about art and how we as societies engage with visuals. Very, very crazy stuff. Okay, we're gonna transition over to the last couple stories and topics. We don't have a formal moment of science, but some of you may have seen the story. What is this? This is Was it a paper?
All
It
right.
was some analysis.
Norm is making me talk about ants. I just want to plug really quickly, if you haven't looked at the JWST images of Neptune, they're incredible. You should look at that. There's actually a lot of great, interesting science stories this week. But I'm talking about ants. A group out of Czechia had done a meta-analysis of, I think it was 489 studies that evaluated the prevalence of ants. And these studies basically looked at ant populations on all the major continents. And using some different models, they tried to essentially calculate the biomass of the ants based off of the analyses and projections in some of these studies. And from that, they're able to suggest a range of all ants on Earth, and their range has an upper bound around 20 quadrillion ants.
How many zeros is that?
10 to the 15th?
16 zeros. 2 and 16 zeros.
That's a lot of ants.
That's a lot of zeros. A lot of ants. The data point that people are pointing out from that number is that compared to the number of humans, it would mean for every person on Earth right now, there is about 2.5 million ants, which is a lot.
First of all, I could take 2.5 million ants. You can,
and that's the question, totally right? Yes. When I say Kishore, for every man, woman, child on this planet, if we were to have to take on the ant army, you would be responsible of taking on 2.5 million ants. It's like it's the new version of your tiny ducks or tiny horses or giant ducks question, or your raccoons and garbage cans. Could you take 2.5 million ants by yourself? Logical next question. What does 2.5 million ants look like? Immediately think of like the cartoon classic drawing of, a Oogie Boogie like biomass in a humanoid form, throwing up fists. But still, what does 2.5 million ants look like mass wise?
You have to imagine a trench coat on them.
Yes, sure. Yes. Trench coat, top hat, takes off the trench coat. It's just like this constantly shifting, biomass of ants. You punch, T-1000 style, you're trying to punch it. It opens up a hole, wraps around you, engulfs you. But 2.5 million ants, if you assume, I think Googling this, an average ant is about 1 to 5 milligrams. 2.5 million ants under 30 pounds.
Under totally 30 pounds. The problem with trying to challenge ants is not their strength, it's their reproduction. So you can't take 2.5 million ants on its own. They're constantly reproducing. So they're going to replenish that army of ants that are coming towards you. So I think that's your real problem here.
By the way, for the queen, you best not miss.
Yeah. By the way, the point of this paper is to emphasize that ants, just given their sheer biomass, which is about like 20% of the total human biomass on the planet, represent a much larger ecosystem element than had previously been given credit for. So when we're thinking about like how much carbon is contained in the biomass of ants, it's actually a pretty significant amount. Not nearly as much as different plant matter and whatnot, but it's still significant for a thing that we're like, oh, some ants. And that's really the point of the paper.
Yeah. My daughter's around under 30 pounds.
I don't know if your daughter could take 2.5 million ants.
But I could take my daughter's
You're going to take 5 million ants?
I could take her size in ants. I think about what is 27 to 30 pounds worth of ants? It's like my daughter. If she was all ants, could I take that? Yeah.
It's like a kindergartner. It's about
20, exactly. 20. Yeah. I got big kids. Okay. We're going to wrap up the show this week with a little bit of VR. 2 things I want to talk about. First of all, PSVR 2. A few people have asked. We did not get hands-on with PSVR 2. I'm trying to reach out to Sony, trying to see if we can get some hands-on time ahead of launch. It's not launching this holiday season. There could be still time before, but a lot of people did get to go try out 4 games ahead of that blog post announcement last week that we talked about. And not only did they try new Horizon content, Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners 2, as well as the remastered Tales from Galaxy's Edge. They got to use the hardware. And so there were some hardware impressions and a couple interesting things that I took away from that. The eye tracking and the IPD assist, that's going to potentially be very helpful for comfort. The pass through to set up your boundary, still, even though higher resolution, still black and white pass through. So as a lot of headset makers are moving to color pass through and some type of pass through AR, that will not be a possibility with PSVR 2. And then also the image quality and brightness. So these are 2K by 2K panels per eye. So
OLED displays, right?
Yep, a little higher than what you'd find in the Quest 2 right now. This is they call it a HDR panel, and brightness being a big thing. I'm really curious about how good the brightness actually is in headset.
So I didn't see any of these early hands-on. Is it pancake optics, or is it still? So you still got that like generic frontal lens design.
Yeah, the bulk on the front. Yeah. They did also confirm, I think, on the official PlayStation podcast that PSVR 1 games are not going to be compatible with PSVR 2. So your library of PSVR 1 games will not play natively or be emulated for PSVR 2.
So that sucks. How big of a deal do you think that is, though, in reality?
I was thinking about this, and I know Will tweeted about it a bunch too. Initially, I'm like, oh, that's a waste of an opportunity because a lot of people may not have bought those PSVR 1 games. A good chance to go back. It's a different tracking system, so this is not using, I think there's the first generation of PSVR games were limited by the tracking opportunities that the PSI used, and I think for them to make that decision speaks to the confidence, hopefully, they have in how long the current developers working on PSVR 2 have had, and a number of developers working on content. And so they should have a strong lineup. If they don't have a strong launch lineup for PSVR 2, then I think it's a mistake. But it tells me that, if you're not going to be able to play Astrobot on PSVR 2, there sure as hell better be an Astrobot 2 coming out for PSVR 2 with DLC content to play the first Astrobot, because that's an essential must play, one of the best VR games.
It's such a tutorial for the device too. What about the reviews of the actual the controllers and this Orbi kind of design?
Yeah, I'm gonna reserve judgment until I get my hands actually in it. I think I'm not concerned as much. I'm curious about the haptics, really. And again, this is about developers taking advantage of what's unique to this system, and hopefully Sony's doing a good job with their developer relations to encourage that adoption. The other big VR news is the announcement today of the Pico 4. So as we barrel towards Connect on October 11th, and our expectation that they'll be announcing Project Cambria, aka what we now assume will be called Quest Pro. There's also some competition from overseas. This is only going to be sold, I think, in Europe and Asia. It won't be sold in the US, but it's a standalone VR headset. This time it does use pancake lenses, and so ergonomically will be a cut above at least what the Quest 2 has, and 2 years after the Quest 2's launch. But it runs on the same Snapdragon processor, 2K by 2K panels. So for each eye, separate IPD adjustment, inside-out tracking, uses eye tracking, facial tracking, they say as well. And so hardware-wise, looks very good, just comparatively to the Quest 2. And pricing-wise is in that 450 euros, so $400 to $500 price point, which makes sense. Color pass-through as well. They say, high resolution, color pastel. I don't know if that's going to be stereo per eye. So
pretty price competitive with where the Quest 2 is now that it's had the price increase, right?
More expensive, but it also
But not by
more
much.
not by much, but also more fully featured. Right. This is like I think they see this as if Cambria is going to be enterprise. This is their hope. It's going to be if it's going to feel like for the consumer side, the thing to do, the thing to get if you want something that has pass through VR but don't want to spend however much Cambria is going to cost. The software library is still a big question mark. They do have a lot of the same titles they announced that you can find in current standalone VR on Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners. I think Guy announced that Virtual Desktop will also be on this. They have Demio is on it. Peaky Blinders, King's Ransom. I think they have an exclusive with Just Dance VR. So it's not nothing. They're putting some money out there for developer relations, but it's not going to be your existing Quest library.
That is a lot of work for them to build up the library. Why not the US? What's the barrier here?
I'm not sure. Could be.
I wonder if this is like any sort of like trade issue. I mean, so the Pico's owned by ByteDance, which is the company behind TikTok, and I don't know if there's actual regulations that are going to make it hard for them to sell this in the US. It would be really interesting to get your hands on this and compare it side by side with the Quest 2, because if the ergonomics with the pancake design hold up.
Yeah, the battery's in the back, right? So it's not going to be as front loaded. That's why they think that sports, VR sports and fitness, VR fitness is going to be a big thing for this headset. I think it's smart that they have a motion tracker accessory also for fitness tracking. And I'm also curious about the UI because what Meta has done on the Oculus software side isn't just the partnerships and buying up exclusives and studios and getting a content library, but also how much the native UI interface is improved. And that's not easy. So this will be interesting to see, what is a company of this size with hardware, what their front end looks like, and what the whole onboarding, like the day-to-day use of just the web browsing, watching video experience looks like. October is when this is launching. This is again Europe only. Shipping October 18th in 13 countries in Europe, as well as Japan and Korea and China eventually. Very, very interesting. The Pico 4. That does it this week for the podcast. Anything else, Kishore, you want to go over?
No, I think we're good. I'm going to bring back a full moment of science next week to recap. There's been a lot of interesting science stories that I want to bring up that have been a little bit below the radar. And we can do a little update on JWST at the same time.
Are images coming in on a pretty regular basis?
Yeah, so I think where we've gotten, I think since the last time we've talked about JWST, we've gotten additional spectra from planets. We've gotten additional imagery, both of nebulae and now planets. We also have a problem with the mid-range IR camera on board right now, and they've shut down that instrument because there's a friction problem with it. So there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'll give one shout out. I saw this. I'll post in the show notes. One of the designers at Adafruit created a really cool implementation of. They're calling them noodles. So these are the LED filament strands. I love using, and Adafruit now sells them. So you can buy them a foot long. They're the silicone encased, very flexible LED strands, and one of them created this lantern-like thing. It's gorgeous. It's a really cool implementation. I'll share it. And just a heads up that if you're looking for them stateside, you can buy them from Adafruit, and they call them noodles, which are a fun name for them. Appropriate name, novel. That does it for us this week. We'll be back next week with another episode, which one will be just 1 week away from 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away, right? October 11th. Connect. Yes, 2 weeks away from Connect. Oh, very excited.
I just want to plug the you did a video at Carbon this week that came out on the Adidas shoe, and that was like a very science nerdy thing. Like if you're into material science, this is a great video to check out, especially thinking about like different ways to cure resin-based materials beyond just UV. I actually thought the explanation of how they used heat-based curing alongside the UV curing to create their lattice structures that have different sort of tensile properties was a really interesting watch for those that are interested in that.
The the headiness they get into in the material science was impressive, and the way that Adam was able to relate that back for the layperson also equally impressive. And our editor Josh did a great job with the visuals for that too.
When the scientists went to the whiteboard, I was like, "Uh oh,
yes, oh no!" they were ready for a whiteboard segment, and we're all looking at each other like, "Ooh, all right, we're really getting into it." It was a really fun visit, and I thought a really great video. All right, do you have an old outro this week? This one created 2 years ago. Great job. More outros, please. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week, and sure, I will see you then. Here we go.
Hi there, I didn't see you.
Let me ask you a question, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Where'd the dicks come from?
Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever just asked your question, where'd those dicks come from? This show is free.
Who did the dicks?
Yeah, who didn't?
Interesting.
Do you want to know the premise, Jeremy?
Well, I kind of get it. I kind of get that some kids drew some dicks.
That's it.